And we're live. All right, here we are. Welcome to the 10th annual, 10 years of this podcast award show. Tonight we're going to be announcing the finalists for the podcast awards being held out at nmxlive.com, the New Media Expo in Las Vegas, April 14th. Joining me is our talented panel, the man, the myth, the legend, the one, the only, Mr. Rick Calvert. How's it going, Mr. Rick?
It's doing well, Dave. As you know, it's crazy at the moment.
It is. Yes, my hair was black before I started working on the New Media Expo.
You're not the first one.
Yeah, so it's been a fun weekend, and I will say this: I've listened to more podcasts this weekend and looked at more websites than I have in probably the 10 years of being a podcaster. It's been
really.
Yeah, I mean a lot of, good. Well, you know, we've been double checking websites and all sorts of fun stuff. And I'm subscribed to about 200 podcasts
That's great.
Beforehand. So why don't you introduce our other panelists?
Well, we have Sheldon from our team, who's you also see here in the window.
Yes.
Sheldon is our tech guy, who will be updating the website, in theory, live as we speak, and announce the finalists in each category. And the truth is, Sheldon could actually put them all up there right now.
But that took all the fun out of it.
Exactly. So we've asked him, please, Sheldon, don't do your job the easy way. Let's do it the hard way and upload each category individually as Dave and I announce them. So.
And how you want to share some stats behind the scenes? What was going on this year in terms of how many people were nominated and votes? Do you have any of that kind of fun-filled? Because it's podcasters, we love stats.
Yep, and so we have more stuff to drill down too. One of the most difficult things are people that get nominated in multiple categories.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Todd first set this up, he said, okay, you can only be nominated in one category or eligible to win in one category and People's Choice or Best Produced. And so, a lot of people have great fans and they nominate them for every single category. They don't pay attention to those instructions. So we've got to kind of go and weed through those. But that said, we've had 65,000 nominations this year and almost 6,000 podcasts nominated, which is a pretty significant increase over last year on the nomination side. I think there was just over 4,000 podcasts nominated last year. So, I mean, almost 50% increase in number of podcasts nominated, which is great. And like you, I found a whole lot of new podcasts over the last couple of weeks, which some of them really, really good.
All right. Well, I guess we should not hesitate anymore. Let me see if we can get this to work in theory. Let's see. If I do this, do you have a black screen or do you have the 10th Annual Podcast Awards? It should be up on the screen.
I had a black screen and now I see you again, Dave.
All right, let's try this.
Technical difficulties are always great.
It's sharing stuff. There we go. So I will put this. There
you go.
There we go. So I will, of course, now if you talk, it goes off the screen. I'll lock this on that. And this will be fun. We're going to do these in alphabetical order. So if you're in travel, get comfy. It's going to be kind of fun. And let's go ahead and go to town on this. As soon as I get my mouse to work. There we go. Best produced. So, great category, great people. We have cool jazz music, right? And we have the Animated Addicts Podcast, Arrow Squad, One's Podcast, Priority One Podcast, Radio Lab, Rebel Force Radio, The 5 a.m. Miracle, The Adam Carolla Show, The Joe Rogan Experience, and What You Say. What You Say. I believe that is all for that category. So one thing I'm missing right here.
Did you find any new podcasts in this category, Dave, or did you find any personal favorites here?
The problem I run into here is I know so many people in podcast. Radio Lab is one I've just discovered this year. So when it was in this category, I was glad to hear that it made this category. But yeah, it's there are a few that in every category, and it's going to be interesting to see because all these there really aren't any. If you've made it to this level, you've got an audience, because it took a while to get all these in here, and so that is the. Go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say, the thing that I noticed is it's a pretty diverse group of podcasts. I've been listening to Radio Lab for a couple of years now. My wife's the NPR listener in the family, so she turned me on to that one. But Adam Carolla, I'm a fan of, and Joe Rogan. Just watching Joe Rogan last night in the UFC pay-per-view. So.
Yeah, Joe's a great example of, as much as we always say you should have a consistent schedule, Joe is the guy that shows as long as you're consistent with your content, because he kind of comes out in spurts, and then he'll do like a 3-hour show. So congratulations to all those in that category. And moving on, we'll get into the best video podcast, and that consists of.
And by the way, I think another thing we should mention for folks who don't realize this about the Google Hangout, Dave, it's about a 1-minute delay from when we say this to when it actually to when everybody sees it. So if they're tweeting us or something, we might be talking about the next thing before they.
Yeah.
We see
they're going to be in the chat room already complaining, going, "What? Where's so and so?" So yeah, there is a delay, but. Barstool Sports Mail Time and Grinders Live. These are, again, best video podcasts. Hustle and Heart TV with Gareth Chisholm. That's the only thing I didn't practice was pronouncing all these today, but that one I think I got okay. I believe NASA Edge. Night Attack. Norm Macdonald live there. Okay, that's a bad imitation. Not Too Deep with Grace Helbig. Rooster Teeth Podcast RT. And again, Joe Rogan coming in, and you'll see where we have a few that they're in the different categories because, again, the consistency in content. This Week in Tech, and that does it for the
This is something that, Dave, a couple quick things. So I noticed on Twitter already a few people are asking for a link to the Google Plus Hangout. I've been telling them to go to podcastawards.com. But if you have a direct link for the Google Plus Hangout, I'll share that as well.
All right. There is a chat window just for us.
Yep.
Rick, you'll see it on the right-hand side, and that is, or if you go down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says links, and we would want to link to the event page.
I'm going to send this to these folks right now. And the other thing I was going to mention, I think this is an important change. You'll notice some of these folks in the Best Video Podcast category show up in other categories. And that is different from the way Todd had done it in the past. If they had been in, for example, Best Comedy or Best Gaming, they wouldn't be eligible for a Best Video. But it seemed, we talked a little bit about this, and it just seemed like it wasn't a conflict for somebody to be a Best Video Podcast and the Best Gaming Podcast, for example. So that is a change this year in the 10th. It only takes us 10 years to figure some things out.
There you go. All right. Well, the next category is business, and I guess I wouldn't be. I guess is its nominees. Yeah, these are the finalists. Well, I guess we could talk a little bit more about process as we're going on through here, right? So
This will be the top 10. These are the finalists. in the business category. So out of all of those 65,000 nominations that we received, some categories had hundreds of podcasts, or even a couple had over 1,000 podcasts nominated. But others might only have 50 or 60 podcasts. We narrow that down to the top 20. Then we have a whole group of volunteer reviewers. And how many reviewers do we have this year, Dave?
Oh, it was somewhere between 40 and 50. And
Yeah.
these were busy people that, you know what, they deserve a round of applause.
Absolutely.
Because, man, did they come through. It was awesome. Yeah, so that it was, well, go ahead and explain how the actual, how these people ended up in the top 10.
Yeah, so we narrow it down to the top 20 based on how many nominations each podcast received. Then we give that list of top 20 to the reviewers, and we try to have every category reviewed by multiple people just to prevent outliers or favoritism or anything like that. So you kind of get an average between the different reviewers. And they go and check each of those podcasts for different criteria, like does it have a iTunes feed visible on the website? Does it have a RSS feed visible on the website? Does it actually have the name of the podcast on the website? Does it have show notes? And you'd be surprised, but some podcasts don't actually have those things. And then they listen to them, and they are judged on sound quality, delivery, so just basic quality of the production of the podcast. And they score each one, and that's how we narrow down to this top 10. And now, obviously, as we announce the top 10 tonight, we'll start the voting on Tuesday. We have like what we call a cooling off period, right? So everybody gets to know who the finalists are, and then on Tuesday we'll allow people to start voting. So did I explain that right, Dave, or did I leave anything out?
Perfectly right. Okay. I like that there's a cooling off period that we can all kind of go. I think it's more for the staff than the podcasters, so we can kind of go.
Well, we can argue and say, "Oh, my favorite podcast didn't make the top 10." And again, you've seen this up close and personal this year, as did I for the first time. This is really hard.
Yeah, like I said, it's interesting. I know every year Todd would always explain how he was surprised and how many. I mean, some of the top podcasts in Serial. I'm saying something that is public. Serial and Reply All. I'm trying to think some of the other top podcasts. It's interesting. If you go to their websites, they don't have an iTunes link, and I don't know why that is, because they're the top podcast in iTunes. So it's Todd has gone through and said some things and in the past about how people are missing things, and we were talking about this before. In the end, if your content merits it, maybe you don't need all those buttons on your website, because word of mouth will just carry it through. So it was really interesting to see that, and just to see the different designs and the different ways that a lot of people making money with Patreon and all sorts of things going on people's websites. So that's the part I like, just going to the different. It's almost like going to a different neighborhood, right? Different communities, and seeing what's going on the website there. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's carry on then. We will move on to the business category, and. First up, we have Beyond the To-Do List, Freakonomics, Marketplace, Planet Money, The Dave Ramsey Show. Should I do a bad Dave Ramsey imitation? That's always good.
Yes, please.
The lottery's just the stupid tax. The Dave Ramsey Show, Read to Lead, Smart Passive Income. Speaking of startup, and The Disciplined Investor, and for anyone who wants to go sideways, you have The Side Hustle Show. So that is the business category. And when you look at that, I mean, startup, smart passive income, Dave Ramsey, I mean, all of those have huge audiences. That's going to be really fun to see who wins.
Well, by the way, and all pretty different, right? Startup coming from the NPR side. Dave Ramsey's been this, business, personal finance guru for a long, long time. And Pat is a new media guy. And I should say, our opening keynote speaker at InMex this year. So it's a very Freakonomics guy. Those guys are written a couple of best-selling books. So it's a really diverse category, as they all are. You've got some independent, smaller podcasts, and then some like big media people in there.
All right. Next up, we have, you guessed it, time to get our laugh on, the comedy podcast. And this is another one that's going to have, just wait till you see all the people that are nominated in this particular category. First up, A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dave. Barstool Sports Mail Time. Comedy Bang Bang, the podcast. Those guys, of course, have made history because they're now a TV show on Comedy Central. Yeah. My Brother, and Me, which if you think about that one a little bit, you'll get the joke there. No Such Thing as a Fish. This is one of the things I love, the creativity in some of the names. Next up, the most downloaded podcaster, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. That would be the Adam Carolla Show. And the Detroit Cast. And I know they won a lot of awards last year, returning the Morning Stream and What You Say. And then, of course, you can't have a comedy without WTF with Mark Maron. So
I saw Mark Maron and Aisha Tyler, again, a past NMX keynote speaker. Really super nice lady, by the way. When I got to meet her at NMX, and she hung around and said hello to a whole bunch of people. I saw her at the Podfest, LA Podfest, a couple of months ago, which a couple of really, really great guys run. It's all comedy podcasters. But I saw Aisha interview Mark Maron as a live podcast. There's probably 500 people in the room. They were hilarious. Yeah. I mean, both funny people being funny together. Mark Maron he's a really, really talented guy. He's one of those podcasters I think a lot of other podcasters aspire to be.
Yeah.
So Barstool Sports is a new one that I found in this one. I'd never heard of them, and one of the reasons I'll tell you why, because they were one of those podcasts that were nominated for every single category like 1,000 times, and I'd never heard of them, and I was trying to determine, do they belong in sports or do they belong in comedy?
Yeah.
And it's definitely a comedy podcast. So, but a good, really, really funny show.
There you go. Next up, we have cultural arts, and this is always kind of an interesting category because everything kind of falls under culture, and anything creative can be, kind of listed under arts.
This is one of the categories. Well, go ahead. Let's announce the nominees.
All right. So we've got 99% Invisible, the Anime Addicts Anonymous podcast, which is interesting because when I saw that listed, it was AAA podcast, and I'm like, what? The Bullseye podcast, Cemetery Confessions, Eddie Trunk podcast. This is one that I found that, holy cow! If you lived through the '80s, wow, had no idea that guy had a podcast. Flowing Into Awareness, Juan Epstein, which I think is funny because wasn't that the name of one of the Sweat Hogs back in the day? Back in the day, Opera Now. There's some culture for you. And Pulp Culture Happy Hour, and of course, you knew it was going to be here, This American Life, and that is the nominees for that particular, or the finalists for that category.
This one, I was going to say, this is one of those categories that we want to ask the community about after this year. Again, it's very diverse, and if you would see the nominees for this category, I mean, it's pretty much wide open.
Yeah. We've got Eddie Trunk. You got Eddie Trunk talking, 80s rock next to Opera Man, basically. And, yeah. It's
by the way, I'm a big Eddie Trunk fan. I've been listening to him for a long time. I actually went to the Heavy Metal Show taping in LA a couple years ago, which is really cool. And yeah, he's been doing this since the 80s.
Yeah. So. All right. Next up, we have education. And this is another one because it's not just about school. It's different people And again, these were nominated by the fans. So sometimes people think I learn a lot from this podcast, so I'm going to nominate you in education. So we have this is going to be an interesting one. Another one where it's like, okay, this is some active audiences here. They're history chicks, and the first podcaster to appear on Oprah, better known as Grammar Girl, Mignon Fogarty. The podcast history of our world. CarCast was one that I was like, does this belong in this category? But if you go over and listen to the episodes, they are teaching people about cars. Hardcore history is another one that, much like Joe Rogan, this guy takes his time, and when he puts out a show, it's wow. Dan Carlin. Stuff You Should Know. You might remember them because when the whole patent troll thing first came out, they were one of the people that were getting sued. PaleoCast, Smart People Podcast, and Stuff You Missed in History Class, and then History of the Christian Church. So again, a wide variety of topics.
That is diversity right there.
Yeah.
But the thing that I noticed in common here is history, and I'm being a history buff. This is a really cool category for me. I know that Mignon has won this more than once, and Grammar Girl is completely different, like you said, CarCast and PaleoCast.
Yeah, exactly.
I hadn't heard of before, but really cool.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a great category. Some cool stuff in here.
All right, next up we have entertainment, and the finalists are Brandy Glanville Unfiltered. Here's a guy that is not new to the Podcast Awards. Rob has a podcast, Rob Sesternino. Star Wars in Character. Taylor Talk. That's right, and when they mean Taylor, they mean Swift. So if people think young people aren't listening to podcasts, yes, they are. That or a lot of adults are really into Taylor Swift. The Blacklist Exposed. The One Piece Podcast. The Talking Dead. The Walking Stalkers. So that'll be interesting because I'm sure there's some sharing of audiences there. Along with the Walking Dead cast. And returning again, What Say You? So that's those finalists in that category.
By the way, for What Say You, somebody is telling me that What Say You is not the name of the podcast. It's What Say You Pod. So we will thank you for that comical podcast, and we will make sure that is correct. By the way, this is another thing that people may not realize. When the podcasts are nominated, they're nominated sometimes by podcasters nominate themselves, which is great. But a lot of times, most of the time, they're nominated by fans. And so they don't even always know the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
So I'll give a Barstool Sports. That podcast was nominated a couple of thousand times, and it was nominated under at least a couple of dozen names. And so we had to kind of go and track them all down and combine them. And this is something that Todd has told us about. He's had to deal with for years.
Well, that, and a lot of people don't know what their website is. I know a lot of times I saw it come through, and I would go to their website and I'm like, it was either a dead link, and then I'd have to Google the podcast to find out that there was a the or something or podcast in the URL. So a lot of times your fans aren't aware of. They know your show, they love it, they want to nominate it, but they don't know the details, which was.
There's just another tweet that I saw that I want to respond to. Today in Gay News said, "Don't you think that comment on some of the nominees may influence people's voting?" I hope not. I'm guessing that Today in Gay News doesn't agree with some of my choices, so I don't think I influenced him. But no, we're not trying to say these are our favorites. You should vote for this one. Don't vote for that one. Not at all. We're just trying.
I'm sorry. I'm just giving you the history of who these people are. No, well, we should say that. We have
absolutely.
All we did was gather the information. I assembled a team of we put out a thing, and I said, hey, if you want to review the podcast, the rule was you just can't review podcasts in your genre, and we asked people what their genre was, and kind of double checked all that to make sure that, hey, I'll review it, and I'll review all my friends and get them in. So we went that route. No, we just assembled the data. And Rick, why don't you tell them the final tally? How does that? I know there's a lot of security over that.
Well, first, I think, again, this is really important because it's a good question that Today in Gay News brought up. Any awards show, program, whatever, there's always going to be really, really good people that get left out for all sorts of reasons. And Todd used to, every year after the awards were announced, and I think when the finalists were announced and then when the winners were announced, some people would complain, and I think some of them with really good reasons.
Sorry, I was playing the.
I thought that was my daughter.
I was playing that's the sound effect after the awards are announced.
But again, I mean, that's
Yeah.
Some people with justifiable reasons, some with less so.
Sure.
But you're always going to have a question of, was that fair? Was there any undue influence? Was it weighted in favor of somebody in any way? And I know I mentioned this on Todd's show before. Todd tried so hard, went above and beyond to have any appearance of impropriety at all.
Yeah.
And we are definitely
trying
to continue that as well.
Yeah, so, I will simply read the names. I was trying. To me, that sounds boring to watch somebody read something, but he has a good point. And
I understand his point, but I disagree. I will continue to comment on things because I think it's interesting, and I would encourage you to do the same. So, if anybody who is in this top 10, it's a good podcast. And by the way, I should also say, most of the top 20 were really, really good. And you're like, oh my God, that podcast didn't make the top 10? Hard to believe. And some really, really big name podcasts where you see them at number 11 or number 12, and you're like, well, they just didn't make it this year, and it's the way it is. So.
Well, we've always said it's about content, but it's also about who has the most influence on their audience, because in the end, it's the audience that votes and nominates and things like that. And you might have a huge number of listeners, but if they're not engaged with you, we've had people in the past. Keith and the Girl are two people that started a podcast out of New York, and they've won a couple of times, and they've beaten these big giant network shows. So if you can get your audience involved, you can walk home with a statue or a.
And I would say there's one other really, really important thing here, Dave. Sorry, is that the whole idea of this is to celebrate the entire podcasting community. Somebody's got to win at the end of the day, but we are discovering, and hopefully the listeners are discovering, tons of new podcasts through this whole process. It gets podcasters excited. It gets the fans excited. Everybody's celebrating, that podcasting, especially, the last year has just had this huge attention from the mainstream media. For people who have been podcast fans for the last decade, or podcasters for the last decade, and I know people argue about who was the first podcaster and all that sort of thing. I know we've got at least a half dozen people at our show who lay claim to being the first podcaster ever. It's a good thing that we can. These are the kind of arguments that we should enjoy and talk about. Wow, that person, really deserves to win, because every time you say that, somebody else goes, I should go listen to that podcast. And that's really what this is about. So. Well,
and when you go to podcastawards.com, you'll be able to, see these people as we, when we get done, they'll all be on the website, and you can go and check out their website. That's the whole idea, is when you go to vote, if you've never heard of, maybe you're not into food and drink, which is what we're going to be talking about next, but you thought maybe I should get into this, go out, check out some podcasts, find your favorite, and cast them a vote. It's a great way to grow your audience, and that's what we're here to do. Like you said, spotlight these people that have engaged audience. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and move on to food and drink, something we almost didn't do today. with all the stuff going on. Who needs food? We just so we have ABV Chicago, Brutal Battle. See, that one you had to think about, because if you're listening to this, Brutal is BREUWTAL. Get it? Brutal. Got it. All right. Dining with Doug and Karen. Dinner Party Download. Spilt Milk. See, some of these you got to really think about. The Alton Brown Cast. The Beerist Podcast. I'm sensing a theme here.
Now that one I get.
The Splendid Table. It's splendid, after all. The Sporkful. Totally Beverages, and sometimes Hot Sauce. And
Gotta have hot sauce.
That rounds out those nominees in food and drink. So get all the foodies can and the drinkers apparently.
A little more scenes info, because Sheldon is reminding me in our back channel, Dave, to let people know the URLs and the RSS feeds for all of these podcasts will be up on the site tomorrow. We're trying to do this a little bit different this year, where we kind of upload them as we go, so have a little bit of drama there for everybody that's kind of following along live. And so, but it actually takes time to enter all that stuff into the database on the site. So just so everybody knows, URLs and the RSS feeds will be up on the site tomorrow. So,
tomorrow.
Yep.
Awesome. We'll
But
carry
the names of the podcasts are there now. So.
There you go.
Okay.
Awesome. Moving on to the gaming category, the finalists in this category: The Patch, Rage Select, Retronauts. I just like the name of that one. 4-Player Network, Trinity Force Podcast, Priority 1 Podcast, Super Best Friend Cast, not just Best Friend, Super Best Friend, Giant Bomb Cast, The Instance, and Gamer Tag Radio. That rounds out the finalists in the gaming category. Are you much of a gamer, Rick?
Actually, I am a.
Your favorite game is chasing your 15-month-old around the house, probably.
That's right. I'm a retired gamer. I used to play EverQuest and World of Warcraft. So I now play a game that is 10 years old called Battlefield 1942.
Okay.
So it was Game of the Year, I think, in like 2005, or maybe earlier than that. And actually, the game is shut down. That's how old it is. That they shut down the servers. There's no support for it. But the fans of the game, there are these rabid group of fans of the game, went and created their own kind of fix to run their own server, so we can still play online and shoot each other. So
that's amazing.
I still log in and play that game from time to time, and some of the same guys that I've been shooting for the last 10 years. And most of the time they're shooting me. But, yeah.
That, again, just shows how a community can pull together, and that's awesome.
You got enough geeks in the community and enough passionate people, you can make some pretty magic.
You can make it happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, well, moving on to our next category of general. And we have Internet Box, Stuff I Learned Yesterday, DNA Today, Serial, we knew that was going to show up somewhere, The Productive Woman, Vassals of Kingsgrave, Success Freaks, Satellite Sisters, Hello Internet, and the XJ Talk Show rounds out that category for general. And again, we have all over the place there. You know, the Internet Box is kind of a bunch of guys getting on the microphone at the same time. You know, then you've got the Satellite Sisters, where a bunch of sisters getting on the microphone and sharing things at the same time. So that should be a fun. And then Serial, which of course you were talking about the growth of podcasting. A lot of people kind of, I guess, credit Serial this year. It was the fastest downloaded podcast according to Apple this year. And then we've got some returning favorites there, Success Freaks and some other ones. So general categories.
I have a theory on Serial. Everybody says that it's responsible for this renaissance in podcasting, which any podcaster who's been doing it for a while would not appreciate.
Right.
But it definitely has raised the awareness of podcasting in general to a whole new generation of podcast listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great thing for everybody. So
absolutely.
There's all this hype about Serial. It's kind of unfair that they're a media company, NPR in particular, so everybody else in the media loves them. So when they do something, it's like somebody made the comment earlier, is it fair that we mention some podcast names? It's not fair for those guys. They have access to media that no other podcaster does. So, but it's not a competition in that way. So they get a ton of listeners. And it is a great show, by the way, you should say.
Yeah.
It's not my cup of tea, but I've listened to it. It is really well produced, and it's great storytelling.
Well, here's the point, though. You think about this. There's this written about all over the place podcast. They're not producing any podcasts right now. Zero. Mm-hmm. They're working on season 2. So where all these other shows are going to be saying, hey, go vote for us at podcastawards.com, Serial, unless they have an email list, is not going to have a way to tell their audience. So that'll be interesting to see how how that whatever filters down. So
I love how there's so many Walking Dead related podcasts that are nominated. Sheldon just sent me another little tidbit. He said 50% of our audience is currently watching this on a mobile device, which is
interesting.
Yeah, sign of the times. My friend Chris Brogan would say, I told you so. Yeah.
I know podcasts right now, the last time I heard, over 60% now are downloaded on a mobile device. Where if we go back 10 years ago, 10 years ago there wasn't iTunes, right? But when iTunes came out, everything was on a PC and that whole 9 yards. So, yeah, we have come a long way. But next up, we have GLBT, and the finalists in this category are Psychobabble, Cocktails and Cream Puffs.
Love that name.
I'm going to say, some of these are hard not to giggle. Throwing Shade, This Is So Gay. And again, I love the creativity. I'm assuming that's Thirst. They're being cute, leaving out the I. Scream Queens with a Z. Feast of Fun. Again, another podcast that's been nominated before. Flame On. Homo Ground. Straight Talk with Ross Matthews. And that rounds out the finalists in that category.
Another interesting thing, just searching on Twitter here, Pillow Fortcast. Is it Pillow Fortcast, I think. Pillow Fort. Just thought it was interesting that, the general category is the first time we've mentioned Serial tonight. Which I think it's interesting too, but it's also a testament to all those podcasters who again would get a little sensitive when somebody says, oh, Serial has created this renaissance for podcasting. Not so. There's a whole lot of really engaged listeners out there nominating their favorite podcast, and Serial's not on their list. So that's again, I think a really great testament to the state of where podcasting is right now.
And our next category, Health and Fitness, and the finalists in this category are, well, that was interesting. We might have to call an audible, Rick.
Uh-oh. What happened?
Apparently this didn't make it to the PowerPoint. So
if you need some help?
Yeah, I need some help. If you could read those off for me, Rick.
Sure. Here we go. In the health and fitness category, you have Sawbones, a marital tour of misguided medicine. Runner Academy, The Angriest Trainer, Vinny Tortorich. I wonder how angry Vinny is. The Dr. Drew Podcast, Marathon Training Academy, Recovered Podcast, Mental Illness Happy Hour, Ben Greenfield Fitness, Magical Medical Tour, and last but not least, the Primal Blueprint Podcast.
So, it's interesting there because, well, we have the big names again. You have Dr. Drew. Of course, people have heard of Dr. Drew, but a lot of these, independent, I guess, is a way of describing those folks.
And also, you notice how it's health and fitness. It's not just all physical. There's several mental health people in there, which maybe we could use after this weekend, some help. But anyway, yeah, it's a really interesting, diverse category.
Yes. And there we go. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. And what's interesting is it's Ben Greenfield, Magical Medical Tour, Marathon Training Academy, Mental Illness Happy Hour, Recovered Podcast, Runner Academy, Sawbones, a marital tour of misguided medicine. Again, another tongue twister here. The Angers Trainer, Vinny Tortorich, the Dr. Drew Podcast, and the Primal Blueprint Podcast. Ah, the joys of live. Isn't that always fun? All right.
It is.
Meanwhile, mature. All right, put the kids away. And here's another. I'm looking at what's coming. And as God is my witness, these were in here before we started. So
not for the faint of heart or the easily offended, and absolutely understand that this is not a lot of people's cup of tea. But it is a huge category.
Yes, it is. And I will give you the nominees in 2 seconds.
I noticed you're having some technical difficulties there.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you heard me. I went through every slide before we started tonight.
Yes, you did.
And when I hit the slide, it's not there. And I'm like, well, that's kind of fun. But good news is, in 2 seconds, we will have those for you.
Would you like me to read them off while you get this stuff sorted there, or you wanted me to just sit tight? I can vamp for a moment.
You could, if you'd like to go ahead and start reading them off, that would be great, and then I will have them done by the time you get done.
Okay. So, and these, I know, Dave, you're keeping them in alphabetical order, which I don't think I did. So these are in no particular order. Love Line, Sex with Emily, Savage Lovecast, Swing with Holly and Michael, Risk, ! Sick and Wrong, that's a great name, Jim and Them, Night Attack, Sex Nerd Sandra, and Sleepy Cast. And
Sex Nerd Sandra?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And Emily Morse, who is one of our hosts of the Podcast Awards this year, is nominated in this category. And I think I mentioned a couple weeks back on Todd and Rob Greenlee's show that Emily was actually at the very first Podcast Awards.
Yeah.
And Podcast Expo. So.
Well, there's another person.
Full circle of life happening there.
Yeah, and there's another person we talked about. Mark Maron and Comedy Bang Bang that have actually ended up on TV. Emily is another one. She actually was on the radio out in San Francisco. She was found from her podcast, and I believe had a TV show on Bravo for a while. So podcasting opening doors for folks, and that is the mature category. And next up, we have movies and films. Now that Dave is recovered, Jim and Them, Love Line, which is, I don't believe,
You're repeating the mature category.
Am I? Well, that's interesting. Just when you think you've got it made. Let me do a quick undo.
Gets even better.
It is getting better, isn't it? Well, this isn't the least bit done. Go ahead and read those off.
You got it.
And we're doing movies and films, correct?
Movies and film.
Okay.
The movie spoilers podcast. Rooster Teeth screenplay. Rooster Teeth is a podcast that's just been nominated, I think maybe since the very first year. Multiple times. They've won a bunch of awards. The Hollywood Outsider. Guilty Film podcast. How Did This Get Made? Film Sack. The Sci-Fi Movie podcast. Animation Addicts podcast. And the Flophouse. This, again, is a great category, and there are several that didn't make the cut for the finalists that are really, really funny. There's some people doing some great, funny podcasts in the movies and film category.
Yeah, so yeah.
Because I think we all like to make fun of movies and film.
Oh, absolutely. They give us, so much content to, because movies always seems like they're either one extreme or the other. And the Flophouse, that's an interesting name for a podcast. All right, moving on. So again, congratulations to all the folks in the movies and film category. Moving on to Podsafe Music, and we have Coverville.
A longtime staple of the podcast awards.
It is. And we have Americana Music Show, or Americana. Here's another more diversity. Irish and Celtic Music Podcast. The Unsigned EDM Podcast. Song Exploder. B2K Radio. All Songs Considered. The Bugcast. And Rick, you got to help me with the pronunciation of this one. The Pound 00 Show, maybe? / Rhino the Bearded.
Rhino the Bearded. So this is the one. So again, to explain how the sausage gets made a little bit. This podcast was nominated. Again, had a lot of nominations, and a lot of people. I didn't see one call it Rhino the Bearded, but there are a lot calling it the Pound 00 Show. But when you go looking for it, there is no Pound 00 Show, at least that I could find. It's under Rhino the Bearded. And it is like a top 100 list of music of the week kind of thing. But it does mention on the podcast, on the website, the Pound 00 Show. So, yeah, that was a tricky one.
Yeah, that's because I'm like going, is it hashtag 00? Is it Pound 00?
Hashtag 00 probably. People always give me a hard time whenever I say pound.
Yeah.
Whatever. But but I think again, this category super diverse in the type of music that these podcasts are covering and playing. Great category.
Well, and it's great for independent musicians who can't get their music on the radio. We're kind of cutting out radio to a certain extent, and a lot of these podcasts, in some cases, like the Irish and Celtic Music Podcast, I mean, that's niche. You know what you're getting when you tune into that one, and have fun trying to find Irish and Celtic music on a radio. It's just not going to get any kind of airplay. But here's an example where podcasting finds its audience, and I have no idea who does that show. I think that's Mark. I forget his last name, but he may not have the bazillion downloads of another big podcast, but he's got a loyal audience, because obviously if he didn't, he wouldn't be here. So very interesting insight there. All right, moving on to politics and/or news, and this is going to be an interesting category. We've got Majority Report, No Agenda, with that one has Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak. Common Sense, Congressional Dish. These are people that go knee-deep into Congress and government. The Bubble Genius, Slate Political Gabfest, Best of the Left, Cognitive Dissonance, Democracy Now!, and The Rachel Maddow Show. So, which is interesting because I listened to a few of these shows, and they do this little thing called reporting that sometimes doesn't happen anymore in mainstream media, and it's interesting to again see the different slants that people take on a topic.
So, for those that know me, I am a political junkie, news junkie. So this is an interesting category to me. The first thing that jumped out at me is these are all left of center or libertarian podcasts. There's no conservative podcast nominated in here, which is interesting. Majority Report, I think, has won the last 3 years in a row for political podcasts. And No Agenda, I don't think, has ever won a podcast award. I could be wrong about that. I've been looking to see if they'd won in a category before, which I thought was surprising because, again, they were one of those podcasts that were nominated so many times in every single category. And I mean, they have some really, really dedicated fans, and I don't think we made any secret about it. We've been trying to get Adam Curry to come to the show since the beginning, and I know Tim Berkwin at Podcast Expo was tried to get Adam to come to the show way back then, and just couldn't. So if anybody is friends with Adam, please tell him we'd love to have him come to New Media Expo. Some people call Adam the Podfather.
Yes.
I know that, again, there's other people who have a claim on that title, but he definitely has his dedicated fans.
Absolutely. All right. Are you ready for the next category?
Yes,
Next
sir.
up, we have, that's right, time to get your religion on. All right. So, in this fun-filled category, we have, are you just watching? Are you? Infants on Thrones. Okay. More Than One Lesson. Mormon Discussion. And wait till you see the diversity coming here. Mormon Faircast. My Book of Mormon. Paula White's Hope for Today. And The Scathing Atheist. Okay. And The Sci-Fi Christian. And The Thinking Atheist. So that is an interesting bunch of podcasts right there. I know Are You Just Watching is a Christian podcast. So we have Christians, Mormons, which technically Mormons are Christians, atheists, thinking atheists, scathing atheists. So that'll be...
it's the Mormons versus the atheists.
That's it. So...
Yeah. This was a really interesting category for me, and to see, again, pretty diverse group of podcasts, but it's obvious to see how many podcasts are of the Mormon faith and how many podcasts are atheist podcasts, who obviously have some pretty engaged fans.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. Moving on, our next category is science, and the finalists in this particular.
Isn't it interesting that science comes right after religion?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, and on the other end of the spectrum, we have The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, Star Talk, Radiolab, Blurry Photos, The Reality Check, Everyday Einstein, Science Friday, The Infinite Monkey Cage, Caustic Soda, Quirks, and Quarks rounds out that category. So Congratulations to everyone in the science category. And again, a wide variety. And again, I love the creativity. Like the infinite monkey cage. It's like, what? What does that mean?
That's a great name.
Names that get you to think, okay, I got to go find out exactly what they mean from that one. So,
did you listen to that podcast?
Which one?
The Infinite Monkey Cage.
No, but that's one. There's that one, and what's the other one about? There's something about fish. It was like
no such thing as fish.
No such thing as fish. That I was like, okay, when this is done, I have to go listen to their podcast because it's just such an interesting name that I'm like, okay, I've got to go check that one out. Because I always, some people like to go the route of just making the title of their show, just obvious so people know exactly what they're getting, and then you have shows like that you go, okay, I've got to go find out what the heck that's about. So, all right, next up we have sports.
So we're really deep with religion and science. Now let's have a little levity, right?
That's right. Let's kick back and talk about some football and things of that nature. So ESPN, Fantasy Focus Football, Talk is Jericho, Solo Monster Sounds Off, Ivy Envy, The Steve Austin Show Unleashed, the Steve Dangle podcast. It's the Battle of Steves here, not to be out-Steved. The Dan Patrick Show. So here again, we're seeing some big names coming into this one. But you also have Soccer Morning, Inside the Jungle, which is a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals. So there's the power of the niche coming out again. Fantasy Baseball from Prospect361.com rounds out that category.
Again, this is a really cool category. So ESPN Fantasy Focus, they've won several years. Talk is Jericho really has come on as a pretty significant podcaster. I think ESPN's got some serious competition this year. Steve Austin Show as well. Steve Dangle, that is a hockey podcast, I believe. And you already said Ivy Envy is a podcast about the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned Inside the Jungle. Cincinnati Bengals.
Ivy Envy actually had the Chicago Cubs changed a rule how they give away tickets because of that podcast. So,
really?
Yeah, because it used to be you had to live within so many miles of the stadium to win tickets. Well, their podcast is global, and so there are Cubs fans in all sorts of states, and they complained, and the Cubs actually listened to that podcast and said, you got a good point.
When you go to a Padres game here in San Diego against the Cubs, at least half the crowd is rooting for the Cubs. Yeah, there are definitely Cubs fans all over the world.
All over the place. So, again, the power of podcasting. You are the media, and you've got that niche audience. These people are tuning in because they love their team. So, all right. This is always a fun one. The travel podcasts. You will see here as we start to announce these. Back again, Amateur Traveler. I wonder how many years he's been nominated. There's another one like No Agenda that just tons of nominations. CoasterRadio.com. Daily Travel Podcast.
That's a new one.
Yeah, Just Japan. Yeah, some of these I was like, oh boy. Nostalgia? How would you say that? It's supposed to be nostalgia, so maybe Mousetalgia? I think I got that right.
Yeah, Mousetalgia. Yeah, it's about Mickey Mouse.
There you go. Speaking of mouse, Special Mouse Podcast. This is a podcast for people who have special needs going to a theme park. The Budget-Minded Traveler. There's an example of a podcast that you know exactly what you're getting to by the name. The Faroe Islands Podcast, again, demonstrating the power of the niche. And WDW Radio, another one that seems to be here every year. And Wedway Radio, which is a new one to me that I went, I'll have to check that out. So a lot of, we've got some mouse people in there. We had, 3 podcasts about Disney here? So we've got a niche fighting against each other here. This would be
So there is, let's see.
Mousetalgia? Yeah, WDW Radio.
Yep, and there were probably 5 others in the top 20.
Yeah.
So the Walt Disney people are crazy rabid fans. My wife is one of them, by the way.
Yeah.
She used to have a annual pass to Disneyland, and I'm sure I'll get sucked back into that sometime soon.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Daily Travel Podcast, that's a brand new one. Just started last year. And as you said, Chris Christensen with Amateur Traveler, I think he's been, as far as I can remember, nominated and a finalist. And the Faroe Islands podcast, this one is, again, great. And he came to the Podcast Awards 2 years ago. I don't remember if he was there last year. But there's only like 200,000 people in the entire world who speak Faroese.
Wow.
And if I could be mistaken, but I think he has won Top Travel Podcast before. And this is, I mean, just like you were saying earlier, the power of podcasting, that podcast with obviously an island that's a tiny little place with a tiny little population can just be so powerful and attract people from all over the world. It's pretty impressive. Just because it's great content.
Yeah, absolutely. Next up, time to get our geek on. And we've got the Technology Podcast. So, we've heard this name already once. WDW Radio?
I think something weird there.
Yeah, I'm like, I think Dave copied something wrong here. Look at the sheet, Rick, because I have Coaster Radio.
Yep.
Is that right?
No.
No, I have the wrong. Yes. Oh boy.
Hold on.
These are hot off the presses.
I will tell you where you're at with technology.
Yeah, let me back up.
And again, these are in no particular order.
Yeah,
One moment,
I can see here where I copied the wrong category into.
So, Security Now. Today in iOS. Daily Tech News Show. This Week in Tech. Our friend Leo Laporte. The Audacity to Podcast. Waves of Tech. Reply All. MacCast. Better Than Average. And This Is Only a Test.
This is only a test.
Yep.
Yes, so, again, Daily Tech News Show, MacCast. No Better Than Average. Reply All, that's a new one. Again, that's from Gimlet Media. Security Now. The Audacity to Podcast. This is only a test. And This Week in Tech. Today in iOS. And Waves of Tech. And we kept this category to the end. I don't know if it got any. It's one of those that's wide open. Of course, that is the People's Choice Award. And
there are some really strong candidates in this category this year.
So we have A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan, Barstool Sports Mail Time, Best of the Left, ESPN Family Focus Football, No Agenda Show with Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, the one I was talking about earlier, No Such Thing as a Fish, Rob Has a Podcast, Rooster Teeth Podcast RT, Serial, and the Detroit Cast. And that rounds out the People's Choice category. And actually, that brings us to the end of our nominations and our finalists. And let me go back to talking face-to-face. It'd be nice. I haven't been able to see anything. I can't see the chat room. It's been interesting. But so, the next step, Rick, is...
So, I believe if I go refresh the Podcast Awards site right now... all of those finalists should be up on the site right now, except for People's Choice. Sheldon is and technology. Sheldon has kept up with us pretty darn well tonight. He had one category wrong. Somebody tweeted us. Thank you for that. Health and fitness and LGBT were mixed up there. He's gotten that fixed already. So in the next couple of moments, you'll see technology and People's Choice show up. Then tomorrow, the URLs and the RSS feeds for all of these podcasts will be up on the site. Then Tuesday, we will start voting. And you can vote for your favorite podcast in each category once per day. So this is when obviously the podcasters will ask their fans to go and vote for them, and we just get a ton of traffic during that time, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes there. And I know some people think that some of these bigger names have unfair advantage, and they certainly do have an advantage if they have a gigantic audience. But there are quite a few big-name podcasts that didn't make it to the finals, and there are definitely smaller audience podcasts every year that win because their audience is just more engaged. And that's the way Todd had designed it originally. So, but I can't wait to go listen to some more of these podcasts that I haven't heard of yet. Some of our favorites are on there already. I mean, other people's favorites, of course, is there as well. And it's going to be exciting. And then obviously April 14th in Las Vegas, we will announce the winners live. Our hosts will be Dennis Miller and Emily Morse. It will be the biggest production we've ever done for the Podcast Awards, being the 10th annual. We think it's kind of a big deal. We will have a red carpet. Remember, Dave, you were there last year. The gentleman from Mormon Faircast won the religion category, and we commented on how he was wearing a suit. He was dressed so nicely, and the only other person who was dressed that nice was our host, David H. Lawrence, was wearing a tux. This year, you got to up your game. This is a celebration. This is when we're all supposed to celebrate and recognize the achievement that the podcast community has made, and I will be dressed up more than I usually am. I usually cheat with a t-shirt and a jacket. I'll have a nice shirt on this year, and I would encourage all the podcasters to do that. We'll have some paparazzi there on the red carpet taking pictures of folks, so it's going to be fun.
Sounds like a fun party.
Yep.
And again, that's Tuesday, April 14th.
Yep.
In Las Vegas.
At the Westgate Resort and Casino.
Yeah. Awesome. So, congratulations to all the finalists. Good luck to everyone. And I think that's all. Any parting words before we leave?
Well, I guess I should say thank you to all of the podcasters that were nominated and participated. A couple of folks have been tweeting. Thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening tonight. I know a couple of podcasters were disappointed they didn't make the top 10. It wasn't because they're not great podcasts. They definitely were. And again, without naming names, a couple of you that said, "Hey, we didn't make it to the finals." You were so close. You have no idea. I mean, it was like a point or two in several of these categories of making the top 10. And thank you to all the listeners and the fans that took the time to nominate their favorite podcasts and help so many people discover new podcasts they might not have otherwise heard. And I think I should also mention, we've talked about this, I think we're going to release the top 20 so people can see who some of these other podcasts were that didn't make the top 10, just so they know some of the other great podcasts out there and the competition that some of these podcasts were up against.
Yeah. Awesome.
How about you, Dave? Any closing thoughts?
It's been a fun weekend. And thanks, number one, thanks to, and I keep locking up. I see I'm frozen. It just keeps.
You're live. You're doing good.
And now I'm unfrozen. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so thanks to everyone all the reviewers that stepped up and helped us review. That was a bit of a time crunch, but we got it done, and that was the one thing that I really took away from this. It was just the community of podcasters behind the scenes that were like, hey, we need these by this date, and boy, everybody just dropped whatever they were doing and came running, and I really, really do appreciate that, and look forward to seeing everybody in Vegas. Get your tickets today, because the plane tickets get more expensive the longer you wait, so get it going, and that'll do it. So thanks to everybody for watching. We'll go ahead and wrap things up, and we'll see you in Vegas.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.